They would, pretend that they were lost in space with their little brothers. The guys, they loved Will. They had a crush on Judy, or, they had a crush on me, whatever. There was just something that captured the imagination. Well, I must say that doing the Danny Thomas show was totally different than my home life. I mean, Danny was a loudmouth. Marjorie had this fiery, personality. That was so totally different than my English-bred family, where we sat around and had tea. I think, though, our family would have been quite boring to see on network television. So I think you needed a little bit of fire and the yelling and the cockiness that Linda Williams brought to the set, with her little zingers that she used to say. I never did anything else, so I don't really know how it would be different. However, from observation, I did start when I was 3, but I was 4 when I started the Danny Thomas show. I was a quick learner, and I kind of liked, I think, being on the set and doing these things that I could not get away with at home, having these little zinger lines and stuff. And we did it in front of a live audience. We did it like a play. We had a table read, which when I was very young, I didn't even go to. Tuesday, we blocked it. Wednesday with the cameras, and then Thursday, we did it as a live play. And you had one shot at it. And I think I enjoyed that energy. So at 4, it just became my life, the way that it was. I went to work every morning, and then I did all my schooling there on the set, because it went for 7 years. Well, between when the Danny Thomas ended and Lost in Space started, I did The Sound of Music. And that was such a totally different experience. Now, I know this isn't about movies, but I think it took me out of that New York family, where I was the Williams family of the loudmouth, comedian. And then I became, this kind of Austrian Von Trapp. And then Lost in Space just seemed to be what the future was. Everybody was they were so enchanted by what was beyond. The idea of a family going into space, being able to live up there. None of the walking on the moon or anything like that had happened. It was all a dream. So the idea of this happening, I think, captured everybody's imagination. I think Lost in Space, when it started, when we did the pilot, it was in black and white and had such a great look, But then when we got picked up to be a series, I think there were a few things that the show was told it needed. It needed a bad guy, which turned out to be Dr. Smith. However, he told the story so many times about how he realized he had to create a character or he was going to get the boot. So he actually created this buffoony character, and it caught on. But back to our art and Lost in Space. There was color that was happening. There was a movement, bright colors, tie-dye, all of this stuff. And our costume designer, Paul Zastupnovich was his name, he had this vision of bright yellows, bright orange. I actually was in kind of a dirt brown the first season. I never really understood that. But then I had that little tiny mini skirt with the Courage boots in mint green with a shocking pink little inset in the top. I mean, I think it was timely. And I think our costumes and our wardrobe kind of, set people up for, wow, that's a cool look. Lost in Space was a lot of fun. It was like being at Disneyland every day. We had these, crazy sets. I had, Billy, who was Billy at the time. Now he's Bill Mumy, but we were, we hit it off and we had fun together, and We'd just, get in golf carts, go around the lot, or there was drama on the set, there's no question. But that had to do with the adults. As the kids, we had a blast. We did a few things on the set. At the time, there was a show called The Invader, and Roy Finnis was the star of that show. And if you were an invader, you put your little finger up like this. So if you're a real Lost in Space junkie, you could actually see shots of us where our little fingers up like this. It's kind of our nod to sci-fi. And there are, believe me, there are Lost in Space people who are so into the show, know every episode. For me, there's just a couple that, stand out. But it is hard to keep a straight face when you're looking at a piece of celery that's, talking to you. The Great Vegetable Rebellion, was, well, let's just say we earned our salary that week. Actually, I do believe that is the story that the writer, when I think it was June or Guy or somebody said, "What is this script?" And the writer, and I can't remember who it was, said, "I did not have an idea in my mind." So he must have been having stew that night or something. As a kid, who cared? I mean, hey, okay, the actors are vegetables this week, or the little mini robots. That was, to me, that was really a fun show. The little tiny robots took over. If I had been an adult looking at it, I probably would have said, "Oh, this is, they must be out of storylines." But as a kid, I didn't care. Yeah, I think with Lost in Space, it was all about imagination. It's like when you don't hear the bell anymore. When the bell rings on, in Polar Express, the magic's there. But when you don't hear it anymore, you need to go out and dance a little bit, lighten up. And then you'll enjoy the show more. I don't think I went into it thinking, oh, I'm going to be a role model for somebody. I loved the idea that Penny was adventurous, that she was fearless, that she'd go into a cave and talk to, some voice in the cave and not run away. I could, I did grow a really mean hydroponic garden. I think those things were great for me as an actress, wanting to do the role of Penny. I don't care what anybody says, but in my opinion, you don't know if you have a hit on your hands, if your character's going to resonate with anybody. You can hope for it, and I think you can think you know the formula, but I really don't believe you do. I think it's all hit and miss. It either is just embraced by people that watch television shows, or it's not. It might have to do with how they perceived space. It might have to do with their upbringing. I don't know. Or, the fact that they're just, they are in the dream time. So maybe they've got some kind of, thoughts that to be in space as a family is cool. It's just a popular show. People love the show, and they love the characters, and they know every character by heart. And I'm like, I don't even remember that show. And they do. Well, I think it came at a perfect time. Space travel was the new frontier. It was a cool idea. What was beyond, we'd kind of seen what the world was made of, and we had, had those shows, those adventure shows, and we had, kind of taken care of the West, the Wild West, and now there was space. It was just open to anything. I mean, what could be out there? And that's why it grasped the imaginations, I think, of everybody. Bill and I, and Marta also, were able to visit NASA about 4 or 5 years ago. And we had everyone come up to us and tell us that we were the reason that they had gotten involved in the space program. These are people that build the Endeavor, and the Columbia, we actually saw the Columbia take off, and they're looking at us, these Robinson kids, and saying, you are the one that made me get into the space program. It was mind-boggling. There is a lot of power in that little box. You're either swept away by the story, or you tune in every week. I mean, I am totally a fan of television. I remember our first television that we got, we didn't even have one, and I was on the Danny Thomas show, and Veronica was starting to work, my sister, and my parents said, we better get a TV. That little box with the little ears, antennas, became something that gathered family together. It was like being around the radio. Now you were around the television. And, I still do that today. My kids come home to watch, a certain show that we're totally addicted to. But it's a time that, we're brought together. And then we talk about it all week long. And we can't wait for the next episode. I mean, it's great. TV's great. I think when that started to happen, because they were a lot more serious, that first season of Lost in Space was more drama. And then it started to get a little kooky and a little crazy. I think that everybody was aware of it. I certainly know the adults were. I'm not so sure I cared. I was a kid, and I actually loved having water dumped on my head in the chariot, as the guys are pushing the chariot to bounce up and down and, run and have these plastic rocks land on. I mean, that was fun to me. That was, I was a kid. I don't think I sat there, seriously and said, oh, what direction is this show going? I do know we were opposite Batman, and that was like the big buzz on the set when we came in after the ratings, well, how'd we do opposite Batman? And Star Trek, of course, came along and kind of took that dramatic niche. Even though some of their stories were silly also, they were much more serious in that second and third year. Star Trek had found its own audience because it was, fascinating to Americans at that time to think about space travel. And I think Star Trek did come in and kind of snatch that part away from us. And maybe that's one of the reasons that, there was more of a comic turn to it. But we were all playing it seriously. Well, I don't know, because I wasn't in the rooms really. I mean, I can, inject that, pop, bam, comic thing was happening. And our wardrobe certainly, rivaled Batman's costume with the colors. So it was definitely had to do with the culture, I think, and what was happening at the time. I was so relieved to get out of the cardboard spacesuits that we had the first season. There was no material. They were made out of a cardboard that had silver on it, put to it. When you bent your arm, it literally stopped the circulation. We had to be on these slanted boards. We had leotards underneath, and we had to be on those slanted boards between takes. They were dreadfully hot, horribly hot, and the lights were just blaringly hot. They were miserable. And then they discovered LeMay, and they created that material, which was heaven. We were so glad. So I really didn't care what color my costume was. I just didn't want to stop the circulation anymore. So I was just so pleased to have that be discovered. Well, I just remember that I never got a call to say show up on the set. I believe we all thought that it was going to go another season. The story is that the stuff was not turned in to network. Somehow, stuff meaning the script outlines, the budget, whatever that part is. I don't know. I mean, you know, if I could be a fly on the wall and know the true story, but, you know, we did go out on top. I think people were shocked we weren't back again. I don't know all the ins and outs, just what people say. Jonathan was a character, and I adored him. He was always sweet to me, always. I thought he was very funny. He was totally prepared, always prepared. It's always a pleasure to work with a professional, prepared actor, and it's hell to work with someone who's not. And he always came to the table knowing his lines, knowing his part. I loved working with him. He was a pleasure to have around. You know, it's not like we did 50 takes because Jonathan was blowing his lines. I think he was a lovely man, I really do. And even though he had this whole persona about who Jonathan Harris was, I didn't even know he was married until many, many years after the show was off. He kept his life separate. And when I finally met his wife, she was darling and adorable. But I think he had two lives. You know, he had his professional life and he had his other life, you know, his married life with his son. Totally, I just don't even remember that as a kid. IRWIN was totally eccentric. When I went on my interview for Lost in Space, he had called me in. He had seen me on the Danny Thomas show. He was a big fan of the show. And he called me in the office, and I can remember he was behind this huge desk. And he looked across this desk at me, and he said, well, he said, I thought you would come in smoking a cigar and being 25. I thought, that is really weird. I mean, I'm just like, oh, okay. Here I was like 12. No, I was just about 13, I think. And I got it. I mean, he knew who I was, and he had been a fan of the show, but he wanted to make sure I kind of fit into the age range. But why I would be smoking a cigar, you know, like I was on Danny Thomas' show, so I must be smoking a cigar now, I have no idea. And I think in his mind, he wasn't really sure how old I was. He did not like having relationships on the show. I think he had a vision of the show being colorful, being, you know, kind of eccentric, having these monsters, breaking new ground, having lots and lots of, you know, rocks and meteors and falling and laser guns, and that was his vision, more like a comic book. He did not want John and Maureen to have a relationship. They could not touch. They could maybe touch, and they tried to get away with it many, many times. I never really got that part, but they have, you know, they would look longingly at each other, but they couldn't go any farther than that. You never saw them go together into their little accordion screen, you know. That was left to the imagination, I guess. But he had this vision for the show, and he wanted it to fit into that vision. You know, I worked with IRWIN again in a movie called Beyond the Poseidon Adventure. And being older and working with him as a young adult, which I was then, I realized he was crazy. I mean, he was, you know, but often creative people are. You know, he would yell and he'd use a megaphone and, you know, scream at us. And, but, you know, I'm an easygoing gal, and I kind of just took it as a grain of salt. After all, I'd worked with Danny Thomas for 7 years, so this was nothing. I do believe that we stayed within budget, though. I think he was kind of cheap in a lot of ways. He cut a lot of corners. I do know that his monsters were recycled. They would leave our show, they would go to Voyage of the Bottom of the Sea, Land of the Giants. You know, maybe they would put hair dye them red or something like that, but often we'd go, hey, that monster was on our show last week. You know, it had one eye, now it had three. We had the same guys in costume, you know, that would don these suits, bless their hearts. And He was cheap in that way. But, you know, there was something about the simplicity of it. There really was. There was one set that had our spaceship, and it was all dirt, and we used that set as kind of our home base. But then we do a little bit of, you know, traveling around the lot. When he'd get really like crazy, we'd actually go to the pond at the back of, you know, 20th Fox, and you know, we had that fabulous music. But it was John Williams who did our music, but it wasn't John Williams at the time, so we got this fabulous music. You know, I'm sure it was one of his very first jobs. So he had some insight into that, I think. I do think he had a formula, because if you look at his shows, there's always the handsome guy. There's the Don West. David Hedison, I think it was on Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. There was always, you know, the pretty girl. And I think that there was some formula in his mind as to what would work, and it did. I mean, he had very successful shows. He also had another formula, I think. When he started doing movies, he hired big name people, you know, beyond the Poseidon. Well, Poseidon Adventure was one, but I mean, in Beyond the Poseidon, I can speak about that because I was in it. Michael Caine, Sally Field, Telly Savalas, Shirley Knight. You know, these are big stars of the day. I mean, he felt that they would bring the audience, and then you just had, you know, a mixture of a lot of explosions and drama. People loved it. It was timely. I'm not so sure it would work as well today, because I do think audiences, they think they want it to be at a certain level. They're more sophisticated. You can't pull the wool over their eyes as well, and yet they want to have the wool pulled over their eyes. They want the surprise. You know, I can watch a show and I'll say, oh, I know what's going to happen here, because I've seen it before. When I'm surprised, I love it. You know, television's been around a long time. When I started, it was a baby. It was just, you know, brand new. And not everybody even had a television. People loved to laugh because it was serious times. I don't think they like to be scared as much. I think that there's a kind of a thread that goes through what's happening in the world at the time. Well, I think Lost in Space was not so much an escape show. I think it was the fascination with space, the final place to not really know what was there, and to kind of investigate that. I think more escape shows were your variety shows. Danny Thomas, I know, was something people tuned into every week. There was always a moral. You know, there was always something that was learned from the experience of that half hour. I think people liked that. But then I think, you know, they grew and they changed, and television has to change as times do. I think now television is slick, and I think it's faster. I think people, they want to be surprised. They want to see something new. I think they get impatient because everything is so instant gratification. And I think that on television, if something is too slow, they get bored. You know, it's not like they have all this leisure time to sit and watch TV. You know, they could be off, you know, loading their iPod. So they want it now. They want whatever it is, they want it now. Also, I think it'll change. I think that, you know, it ebbs and flows, and I think, as with anything, there will come changes. You were talking about Westerns. I think Westerns will probably come back again. Who knows? Things may happen in the world where all we want to see is innocence because it's not there anymore. So I think it's just a changeable thing, television is. I think science fiction grabs your imagination. I think the thought that something could maybe happen like that, I think a lot of people like to be scared. You know, a lot of people like roller coasters, and others don't. It's that magic, that's the magic of television that can grab people. You know, some people like to have clues, you know, and figure out who the killer is or whatever. For other people, that's too much work. You know, they'd rather just sit and be entertained. You know, it's changed, it's grown, it's you know, just movable. So, Twilight Zone, I do remember Twilight Zone, and I remember specific episodes that scared the heavens out of me. Oh, the one with William Shatner with the monster on the wing. I mean, do you ever look out an airplane window and see that? I mean, not see it, but think about that. I have for years. That made such an impression on me. Well, that's what I mean about today's television. We're more sophisticated. A man couldn't put a suit on, you know, unless you were doing a comedy show and he was in a suit. He'd have to look real, you know, digitally or whatever. But boy, that worked for me those days. In watching that for the first time and seeing that monster on the airplane wing, oh, that worked for me. And in my mind, I remember it not as a man in a furry suit. Yeah, I think that there are ways of presenting stuff on television that make people believe that they have decided a certain way, or they think a certain way. You know, it happens with products on commercials, and you know, it happens subliminally, I think, a lot of times. There are things on television. You know, and now they have product placement. There are ways, the news slants things that make up minds of people. You know, depending on how much television they watch, or whether they investigate all different sides of something to make up their mind. If they only hear one way, that's what they believe the truth is. I do think it's a dangerous tool, yeah. I mean, it can be used, you know, I truly believe the news should be said with absolutely no opinion. There should be no slant to it. You know, we're not stupid. We can make up our own minds. But, you know, that's a personal thing that I feel the news is totally slanted. And, you know, you have to turn to a certain channel to decide, you know, what kind of way you want to hear it. You know, when people don't investigate stuff, they take it as word. So if something's said a certain way on television, people believe that. And that's, you know, that's kind of sci-fi, isn't it? Our minds are taken over by the television. I don't know. Well, I was absolutely thinking about this the other day because we had a black actress, Amanda Randolph, in the Danny Thomas Show, who was our maid. And I loved her. She was a lovely, lovely lady. But I didn't realize it at the time. I was way too young. But she was on the show, I guess, for 4 or 5 years. And I guess at that time, most people did have servants. And I mean, I haven't looked it up as to what was happening in history or whatever. But then she wasn't on the show anymore. But we had great entertainers. We had, you know, Sammy Davis Jr., we had Diana Ross. I mean, there was no slant on the show that way. I mean, I don't think Danny, who was Lebanese, he had no, you know, problem having black actors on the show. And we had Ginny Toohey, who was an Asian little singer. I don't think that was an issue, but when I look back at it now, you know, that is an issue today. That is something that, you know, people can go, well, wait a minute, that was, they had this servant that was, I don't know, people need to lighten up. I think it's way too complicated. I did love Ed Sullivan, because that was a family event. I used to watch 12 O'Clock High with my dad, and I remember that very fondly. We used to sit and watch 12 O'Clock High together. Why? I don't know. I can't even remember the actor in it. Maybe that's why I wanted to watch it. I don't think that's why my dad watched it. It was kind of like The Unit, today. We did watch Bonanza, yes. For me, it was kind of cool they had our last name, my sister and me. I loved Little Joe. He was my heartthrob, yes. I really liked Little Joe a lot. I loved Westerns. Westerns were fun. The idea of living life like that was, although it seemed a lot more convenient, like there wasn't a struggle, like how it must have really been. But now we have the History Channel for that. As far as learning the craft, Danny Thomas was a great teacher. I mean, you can't learn something better or faster than doing it every week. And we, learned our lines. We did it live. I think that was a big learning curve for me. Kind of waiting for the laugh, not cutting a laugh off. If you start talking too soon, people stop laughing. All that stuff I learned from Danny. Later, I had this uncanny way of inserting myself into this other character. When I was Penny, I was Penny. I was this girl that was in space. And I had my family with me, and there was all this stuff around me. I don't know whether it just became that, or I think I learned, and I learned a lot not knowing that I was learning. I know on Sound of Music I was totally Brigitte Von Trapp, totally immersed in that. Totally missed my mother in this show, because I figured when the captain was playing the guitar, who would I miss as my mother? Now I don't know if child actors thought about that stuff, but I did. I was just in the moment, but I've always been able to be very disciplined like that, be able to leave the set, go and do my math in the classroom, and then go back, and do some scene where I'm like looking at some silver alien or something, and then go back and do my, geography. It's a discipline, and it's showing up prepared. That's what it's about. I think acting's a craft. That's what my sister Veronica and I always thought. You went to work. You did your job. You didn't, just say, oh, I don't feel like doing this today. It was just a work ethic that, we had. Jonathan didn't really say, no, you need to do this in this scene or whatever. Directors, certainly, that's their job to direct you. But as far as being in the moment, I do think that both Veronica and I were able to do that, whatever we were doing, whatever part. You think I can explain that? It is phenomenal. These conventions, that the Lost in Space people go to, but they just love sci-fi. I can't explain it, quite honestly. They're fans. They're fans like, you would be fans of the Beatles in my day, If they had been at a convention, I might have gone to get their autograph. I did get to meet them, and I was 2 feet off the ground. But, that's all I can compare it to, is the fact that, and what fans say to me, and that is that they grew up with the show. The girls loved being Penny, and they would run around their backyard, and they would, pretend that they were lost in space with their little brothers. The guys, they loved Will. They had a crush on Judy, or, they had a crush on me, whatever. There was just something that captured the imagination. absolutely proud that I was on 3 hit movies and shows. Yeah, I loved my past. I wouldn't change anything about my youth. Of course, I never lived it any other way, so I was a working actor. I loved to act.